Could Mike Tomlin be on his way to the New York Football Giants after this season? There's certainly a lot of rumors connecting Coach T to the Big Apple. I'll let you guys know my thoughts on that possibility at the top of today's edition of Steelers Talk. Then there's been a lot of talk and discussion surrounding Jaylen Warren's usage in the Steelers offense, especially after he got less than 50% of the snaps versus the Los Angeles Chargers. We'll talk about that later in today's show. And then we'll finish up today's program with a report from Mark Kaboly where he reveals why the Steelers traded George Pickens for a third-round pick this offseason. So if you don't know what the answer to that question is, make sure you guys stick around. But before we get into the content today, make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already. All of our content, whether it's our live watch parties for every single Steelers game, to our 2 videos that we put out for free on this channel every single day, to our breaking news coverage, all of it is 100% free of charge for Steelers fans to enjoy. We currently have the largest individually run Steelers channel anywhere here on YouTube with over 103,000 subscribers. And the reason why we've grown our subscriber base that much is because we provide you guys free, informative, and entertaining Steelers videos, at least 2 a day on this channel. We go live every time there's a big move made by the con artist. And we also have weekly watch parties and live shows where we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers with our very large Steelers fan community here on YouTube. So make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already, if you want extensive Steelers coverage 24/7, 365. All right, so now let's get into, really a huge rumor that has been circulating throughout the week, which is that multiple people in the media and multiple outlets are now connecting Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin to the New York Giants head coaching vacancy. Of course, the Giants fired Brian Daboll this week, and there's been a lot of rumors circulating about which guys they could be targeting, and Mike Tomlin has been one of the most heavily brought up names in that discussion this week. Now, I will say this, okay? I do think a Mike Tomlin trade is pretty unlikely. And I know that there's a lot of people in this fan base that want to see him gone, want to see him fired, all that stuff, but I think that not 1, not 2, but 3 steps need to be done in order for any Mike Tomlin trade to potentially become reality. The first step is that Pittsburgh wants to start a rebuild in 2026, okay? And I think that the way that Pittsburgh is going to be willing to abandon their kind of win-now philosophy and strategy that they're currently adopting is if essentially things go to hell for the rest of this season. They win less than 10 games and they miss the playoffs, all right? And that's still very possible at this point in time. You're sitting at 5-4. If the offense doesn't get better, if the defense continues to be inconsistent, all that stuff, if that stuff continues and you finish with less than 10 wins and you miss the playoffs, then certainly Art Rooney and Omar Khan might want to fully embrace a rebuild and maybe take a step backwards in team development and get some more draft picks, trade some veterans away so that they can inject this team with more young talent and start over potentially with a new head coach. Now, the second step that needs to happen is that teams in the National Football League would need to be willing to pay up for Tomlin, all right? And for Tomlin, he's a future Hall of Fame head coach. So I think, when we see guys like John Gruden, who is not going to be an NFL Hall of Famer, Sean Payton, who probably will be, but, he isn't yet, get traded for first-round picks, the Steelers are going to want a first-round pick, at least, in exchange for Mike Tomlin. And these first 2 steps, honestly, guys, I think that teams would be willing to do that because there's a lot of teams out there that crave the amount of stability that Mike Tomlin has brought to the Steelers over the course of nearly 2 decades here in Pittsburgh. And listen, man, if teams are offering a first-round pick or if they're offering a first-round pick and more, that would certainly be enticing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But this is the most important step here, guys. Step number 3, and I think it's the least likely to be able to be executed, which is that Mike Tomlin has to agree to go to a different team. Because I don't know if a lot of people know this, but he does have a no-trade clause in his contract. So he's going to have to agree to go to whatever team he gets traded to, okay? And, I'm just not really sure that he would want to go to especially a New York Giants team that is still rebuilding, all right? They did just draft a quarterback, but it was a quarterback that Mike Tomlin passed on this year. Does he really want Jackson Dart to be his franchise quarterback? And then with the rest of the team, the offensive line is not very good. They got Malik Neighbors, but they don't have a ton of other weapons outside of Cam Scatterbo. And then on defense, I mean, they got a good pass rush, but they certainly are bereft of talent both at linebacker and in the secondary at this point in time. So does Mike Tomlin really want to go from the Steelers situation where he's been here for nearly 2 decades, his family lives here, all that stuff? Does he really want to uproot his life to go to the Big Apple and go to East Rutherford there and, completely rebuild the Giants? I think he'd rather just stay here and rebuild the Steelers. So I think if Tomlin agrees to get traded somewhere else, it has to be with a good team. Like, it would have to be like if the Cowboys wanted to part ways with Brian Schottenheimer at the end of the season and they wanted to trade. But I don't even think they have draft capital to go get Mike Tomlin at this point, right? It would have to be, a team with an established veteran, maybe even star quarterback with a decent roster that can win now. And I just don't see a lot of teams firing their head coaches with those situations. So unless the perfect situation comes up where Tomlin would agree to leave the Steelers for a winning program, I just don't see him waiving his no-trade clause for anybody, and I just don't see the Steelers terminating Mike Tomlin because they don't want to pay the remaining money on his contract, which is very, very hefty. And, because of that, I would say, a Tomlin trade this offseason probably has a less than 5% chance of happening. All right, I think that the Steelers are very proud of the fact that they've only had 3 head coaches, since the Super Bowl era started, all this different stuff. And if the coach is not going to be willing to be traded anywhere, then I don't think they're going to terminate him. So I would say at this point, probably over a 90% chance Mike Tomlin returns as the Pittsburgh Steelers head coach in 2026. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. What is the percent chance that Mike Tomlin gets traded next offseason? Put it on a scale of 0 to 100 for me down there in the comment section. 0 meaning no chance he gets traded, to 100 meaning he's definitely getting traded. Let me know what you guys think for today's pinned question. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Prize Picks. While I tell you about Prize Picks, let me know your answer to this question down there in the comment section. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today at Prize Picks. And the hard-hitting football action this season is just getting started, and it's even better with our friends at Prize Picks. The weather might be changing outside, but the feeling of being right never gets old. So keep the season rolling on with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. Prize Picks is super simple to play. Just pick more than or less than on at least 2 player stat projections, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. On Prize Picks, how you play is up to you. If you want flexibility, choose the flex play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you want the biggest payouts, go for the power play. No matter how you play, though, Prize Picks is a great way to put your takes to the test. Join millions of users and sign up for America's #1 fantasy sports app. And you guys can check out my Prize Picks lineup for this weekend's matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm taking the more on passing yards for Aaron Rodgers, the more on rushing yards for Jaylen Warren, and the less on passing yards for Joe Flacco. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So now let's shift our focus here to Jaylen Warren, where it's certainly been a big talking point this week on Steelers Twitter that Jaylen Warren hasn't been on the field and hasn't been getting enough touches this season, and it's because of coaching malpractice why that's the case. Now, the thing that kind of spurred this discussion is that during the Los Angeles Charger game last week, Kenneth Gainwell actually had the most amount of snaps, and Jaylen Warren only had 24 compared to Gainwell's 27, and people saw that number, and they're saying, why is our best offensive player not getting at least 50%, if not more, of the offensive snaps when it comes to the running backs? Now, I will say some proper context here that you guys should be aware of is that Gainwell played pretty much exclusively at running back during garbage time. When the game was out of hand for the Steelers, kind of midway through the fourth quarter, it was pretty much all Gainwell out there. And honestly, I agree with that decision from the Pittsburgh Steelers. If the game is in hand and the game is over, why would we trot out our best offensive player for a chance to get injured, right? So I keep Jaylen Warren's legs fresh. I like that idea from Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith to save Jaylen Warren's legs for later in the season because the game was pretty much in hand at that point. And then, you look at the breakdown of the snaps between the running backs throughout the entire season, excluding week 4 versus the Vikings because Warren was out that game. But, in all these other weeks, Jaylen Warren very clearly has the most snaps. Kenneth Gainwell does get out there, but, he is certainly he's been a good number 2 back for the most part. I think he hasn't played quite as well the last 2 weeks, but for, the majority of the season, Kenny Gainwell has been a pretty darn good number 2 running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then Caleb Johnson has been getting more and more as the season has gone on, but just 24 snaps in the games that we're talking about there. But listen, man, it's not like the Steelers didn't get the ball to Jaylen Warren, all right? He got the ball 16 times on 24 of his snaps. That's 2/3 of the snaps where he was on the field, he was getting the football. So when he was out there, like the priority was get the ball in the hands of number 30. And he also had, he had 50% of the touches on the entire team. All right, to Mike Tomlin's point, there just wasn't a whole lot of touches to go around, and that's why Jaylen didn't get to the 20-plus that he probably should get in a normal football game. But because the Steelers were consistently going 3 and out, they just didn't have a whole lot of offensive plays. Like, it just limited the amount of touches to go around, and Jaylen Warren himself had 16 touches. Everybody else on the offense only had 16. So he had half of the total touches of the entire offense last week. So certainly the Steelers are prioritizing getting the ball to Jaylen Warren. But I can hear you guys saying at home, but Jack, they're not playing him on third down enough. And I hear you guys. All right, I'm open to that discussion. I am open to the discussion of using Jaylen Warren more on third downs. He's an excellent receiving back. Obviously, if teams want to sag back and, leave Jaylen Warren wide open, you can just get it out to him. He usually makes a guy miss, and he could pick up a first down on just a check down, right? He's one of the more dangerous third down backs in the league. But I also think, it's worth mentioning that if he plays more on third down, then you're going to have somebody else come in on early downs. And are you willing to sacrifice Jaylen Warren's production on early downs and his snaps on early downs in order to put him out there on third down? And, I think that certainly you could put him out there for a couple more third downs than he did against the Chargers, all right? But, I think that something that could be a part of this discussion is, could we see Caleb Johnson get some more playing time on early downs? Because I don't think Kenny Gainwell is an early down back. He's just too slight. But, this might be a really good opportunity to start increasing the workload of Caleb Johnson, who honestly has looked pretty good in the time that he has had over especially the last 2 weeks. And if you give him some more of that workload on early downs, that's going to open up more opportunities for Jaylen Warren, who is an excellent third down back, by the way, to be more of a third down back for you. And I think that would be a good game plan. And I think that that's something that the Steelers will certainly consider as the season goes on. But, I think people are focusing on the wrong issue here, okay? Like, people keep honing in on Warren not getting enough snaps, Warren not getting enough snaps. That's not the issue to me, guys. The issue with me is that nobody else is capable of stepping up in the Steelers offense other than Jaylen Warren and DK Metcalf on occasion, right? Calvin Austrin III only has 2 games this year with over 50 yards receiving. All right, Roman Wilson only has 1. Pat Freiermuth only has 1. Darnell Washington only has 1. It's only happened 6 times this season, guys, where a player outside of DK Metcalf has gotten more than 50 receiving yards, okay? So for me, if Jaylen Warren's not on the field, but, we make a successful play over to Calvin Austrin III, or if Pat Freiermuth is getting the football, or DK Metcalf catches a touchdown, nobody gives a shit if Jaylen Warren's not on the field for that play. The reason why people are noticing Jaylen Warren is not on the field is because the Steelers' offense is failing. So they have to find other players that can step up in this offense to be able to kind of alleviate the load that Jaylen Warren has been taking throughout the course of this season. And frankly, DK Metcalf has been taking on this season. I think that is the main issue that we should be focusing on at this point, because Jaylen Warren is a really freaking good player, and I'm all for playing him more. But, at the end of the day, this is the NFL, and you do have to split reps with the rest of the backs in your room. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. Do you think the Steelers offense will bounce back this year? Give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section. I can see arguments for both of these, so let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. We'll finish up today's edition of Steelers News and Rumors by talking about a new report from Mark Kaboly here from the Pat McAfee Show, who claims that the Steelers and Steelers players, it wasn't the coaches or the front office, it was the players that were quote-unquote done with George Pickens, leading to his trade this offseason. Now, Kaboly put out a very extensive tweet breaking down all the different points of his report here, so we're going to go one by one here. This is what Kaboly had to say. More on the Steelers trading George Pickens to Dallas. Significant locker room guys got fed up with Pickens' antics and quickly got turned off by him for multiple reasons, I was told. Another point, some felt it would be counterproductive to keep him around. Even with his unique talent, they felt the locker room could turn toxic with him inside of it. Not many teams were interested in trading for Pickens, making it difficult for the Steelers to get market value. The Steelers wouldn't have traded him for anything less than a third-round pick, something that was not offered until the draft. not many were broken up. Well, not many in the Steelers locker room were broken up within the organization that Pickens got traded. And then just recently here, this is what Kaboly had to say about the situation. I think the Pickens trade needed to be done. I think it was getting really ugly behind the scenes there. And I think some of the players of veteran leadership weren't too thrilled with George. So I think that pushed it to the edge. And I think a lot of the players were finally fed up with him, and the right players were fed up with him. So certainly interesting comments there from Mark Kaboly. And I think, something that's really easy to say as a fan, somebody that never, was a part of the Steelers organization, had to deal with George Pickens being late to meetings and all of his antics on the field and off of it. I think it's easy to say we should have kept him. And frankly, man, I was one of those people. This offseason, I was like, man, yeah, DK Metcalf and George Pickens, keep these two guys. It would be so much fun. And as a fan, it would have been fun, right? Seeing those two super talented players on the same offense, and now especially because the wide receiver room here in Pittsburgh has not been up to snuff outside of DK Metcalf this year. It's so easy to say in hindsight that we should have kept George Pickens. But listen, man, we weren't the ones that had to deal with him on a day-to-day basis. Like, this isn't Madden, okay? These players don't just, pick up a controller and play their positions, on the TV, right? They actually have to deal with each other as human beings every single day. And it sounded like not only front office people, not only coaches, but also the players. TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, the leaders of this team were thinking that keeping George Pickens would have been toxic to the team. So I'm going to defer to them, because obviously they know more about the situation than I do. We're not a part of the Steelers locker room. And would it have been super fun to make it work between DK Metcalf and George Pickens here in Pittsburgh? Absolutely. But you think George Pickens would be happy in the Steelers offense right now, getting like 3 or 4 targets a game? I don't think so, man. I think it would have been a very, very explosive situation. And at the end of the day, we got an extra draft pick by trading him away. And the best that we can hope for at this point, guys, and now that everything is come and gone, is that someone else needs to step up. Whether that's Roman Wilson, who's shown some really good flashes over the last month and a half or so. Whether that's Calvin Austrin III. Whether that's Pat Freiermuth getting more time. There's no reason why he shouldn't be playing more over Jonnu Smith, who's been terrible all season long. Right? There are potential solutions here in Pittsburgh, but nobody else was making plays against the Chargers last week, and, frankly, they haven't been making a ton of plays throughout the entire season. It's mostly been Jaylen Warren, DK Metcalf, and that's it for the entire season to this point. There's been little flashes from these other guys, but we need more consistency from the supplementary and secondary pieces of this Steelers offense. And if it doesn't come, I'm not sure. It certainly puts a ceiling on what this Steelers offense can be down the stretch. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comments section. Was the George Pickens trade a mistake? Type G if you think it was a good move, or type M if you think it was a big mistake. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. And that'll be it for today's edition of Steelers News and Rumors. Thank you guys so much for stopping by here today. We'll have more coverage for you guys, getting you ready for Sunday's matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. So until next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.